I mean, Trump created low inflation, secure the border, make peace with so many small conflicts in the world. And I disagree with your former guest before, Jennifer. He said it's not good to meet Putin like this. Why? I mean, we need to try to get peace every way we can. I mean, we have to try that. And Democrats, I don't think they like that Trump will get credit if there's a successful meeting here, because Democrats have pushed the Russian hoax. And now we are just seeing how Democrats in different cities trying to destroy the cities with open borders and homelessness in the streets and crime everywhere. I mean, I caught an arsonist in L.A. The police let him go.
Robert,
so this is how the cities are working now. And I think Republicans are better all the way around. They're creating peace in the cities, too.
Robert, got your point. That's Robert in California. Jennifer Wistrand, we were just talking about the expectations for today's meeting. Now that Air Force One's on the ground, pool reports coming in about what the president and his aides are saying about today. This is Meredith McGraw from Politico just a few minutes ago saying the previously planned one-on-one meeting between President Trump and President Putin is now going to be a three-on-three meeting. President Trump will be joined by Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. So already some changes to the schedule that we had originally expected. By the way, the photo or the video that viewers are seeing on their screen, President Vladimir Putin's plane coming into Anchorage and getting ready to land. The three-on-three versus the one-on-one, does that change things in your mind?
I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. Special Envoy Witkoff has been the Special Envoy for the Middle East, and again, mentioned a little bit briefly that the U.S. had held meetings with Russia back in February, I believe, in Saudi Arabia, and Witkoff, I believe, was in attendance. So it'll remain to be seen. Also, given Secretary of State Rubio being there, is it going to be comparable people on the Russian side? So are we going to see Sergei Lavrov, who would be the foreign minister, and then will we see a special envoy on their side? Or again, are they going to introduce finance, economics? It's not clear how that's going to change the calculus.
The politics here, or the optics, there was so much focus on, and I'm thinking Helsinki in 2018, on President Trump meeting alone with Vladimir Putin. And there's certainly been plenty of reporting about the history of their relationship. Can you just go back and remind viewers about that moment? We're not going to see now, according to reporting, a one-on-one closed-door meeting between the two presidents.
Yeah, that's an excellent point to raise. So in a lot of presumably viewers' minds, they'll think back on that summit in 2018 in Helsinki between President Putin and President Trump. And there were a number of criticisms out of that, one of which was, as you said, meetings where there weren't any other people in the room, and that it was relying, actually in that case, just on the Russian interpreter. And so saying it's actually better if you have other people in the room who can help guide or direct the conversation. Also, criticism that came out of that summit, the Helsinki 2018 summit, is that at the time, there was a lot of discussion going on about Russian involvement, interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential election, specifically in the Hillary Clinton campaign. And Trump was criticized on both sides of the aisle for stating, in the context of that summit, basically coming down as appearing to side more with President Putin and the Russian perspective, that in fact there had not been meddling, that was only, it's Russia propaganda. And President Trump did retract or backtrack on his statements in the following days, saying that he shouldn't have questioned U.S. intelligence reporting. But you're right to raise this. It's very possible that he was advised in advance of the summit. Even if you want to have a one-on-one meeting, it's better if there are a couple other people in the room on both sides.
Now that President Putin's plane is on the ground, can you talk through him being on the ground in the United States and the significance of that? And how he can do that? I know it was 2023, I believe, where the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin for war crimes, I believe was what they originally called it. So how can he be on the ground in the United States and traveling freely? Has that been part of the negotiations leading to today's meeting? He's going to be on a military base in the United States.
Yeah, it's highly significant. You're right. In terms of, President Putin traveling to the United States, my understanding is it's been about a decade since he met with U.S. officials, again, on the margins of the annual UN Assembly meeting in New York. And so to be traveling to the U.S. for a one-on-one meeting with the U.S. president at a base, obviously, I presume part of, as we talked about earlier, the historical significance of it being in Alaska, but also being on a base is significant from a security perspective. But you're right, since 2023, the International Criminal Court has issued, or at that time issued, an arrest warrant for President Putin because of a number of reasons, but specifically what was in the press quite a bit was his illegal deportation of Ukrainian children from Ukraine, either to Belarus or to Russia. And because of that, again, his mobility, specifically to Western countries, has been highly restricted in the previous years. So the fact that he's now traveling freely to the U.S. is significant.
We're waiting for President Trump to step off of Air Force One. President Putin's plane now on the ground as well in Anchorage. There's an arrival ceremony expected sometime in the next 15 or 20 minutes. We're showing you live pictures from Anchorage. And we are taking your phone calls throughout this afternoon on this highly significant meeting between President Trump and Vladimir Putin. This is Roy in Wheatland, Missouri. Democrat, Roy, what are you expecting from today's meeting?
Hello, thank you for taking my call, and I just enjoy your program, and C-SPAN's right up there, and it's a really good deal.
Appreciate that, Roy. What are you expecting from today?
Well, I was expecting, like I said, I'm a Democrat, but I'm an American first, and I would remind all callers that we're Americans first, that as cunning and sly and evil as Donald Trump is, maybe like he was talking about previously, this is a chance to jump Putin and put him in chains and go ahead and get him on trial for them war crimes. I would love your response to that. Thank you.
Jennifer Wistrand, that as a possibility today, and I will say, I think there's betting websites out there where you can bet on things in the news, and this was one of the things that you could bet on.
Wow.
The odds, very unlikely that it could happen, but you could bet on this scenario. What are your thoughts on this scenario?
Well, I appreciate the caller calling in and making that comment. I confess I had not anticipated that as one of the possible scenarios coming out of it, but I suppose it's a possibility. I do, but I think the caller raises a good point in terms of, and this we've been talking about, what is going to be discussed here. I think there are a whole number of things that could be discussed, right? It could be the ICC, the International Criminal Court arrest warrant. It could be, additional sanctions, right? And President Trump could bring up, I've been willing, President Putin, to kind of back off on certain things, but if you don't make these concessions, I'm going to ramp up sanctions. So I think we really, I'm not a betting person, so I don't know, but it seems like there's a large number, panoply of things that could be on the table here.
And again, we have a very basic outline of what we think is going to happen today, though it's already changed. There will no longer be a one-on-one between President Trump and President Putin. It's going to be a 3-on-3 meeting. President Trump now, according to the pool that has been traveling on Air Force One, it'll be Secretary of State Marco Rubio and White House Special Envoy Steve Witkoff joining the president, a 3-on-3 meeting that's going to be happening today. We've also been watching Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's social media pages, an expectation that he would be sort of live tweeting the events today. As we said, he's not a part of this meeting. President Trump has said that he could be part of a future meeting if there's a ceasefire deal today, a peace treaty meeting hashing out the conditions of peace in Ukraine. But Volodymyr Zelensky tweeting this afternoon, this was about 30 minutes ago, so right as Air Force One was landing, Volodymyr Zelensky saying this on X: Russia must end the war that it itself started and has been dragging on for years. The killings must stop. A meeting of leaders is needed, at the very least, Ukraine, America, and the Russian side. And it is precisely in such a format that effective decisions are possible, making the point, once again, that he's not there and that this doesn't end until he is, or Ukraine is represented in a negotiation.
Absolutely. I think President Zelensky is in a very difficult position. Going back to the Oval Office meeting that he had with President Trump and Vice President Vance in February, where that, by all accounts, did not go as he had anticipated and had to, in the following days, apologize, and then President Trump accepting the apology. So I'm sure that right now President Zelensky is frustrated that he's not in attendance, but at the same time doesn't want to look too frustrated for fear that it's going to cause President Trump to take a more pro-Russia than pro-Ukraine position on peace negotiations. So I think he's in a difficult position, but I think he's playing it as well as he possibly can.
We're also looking for social media posts from members of Congress as they're watching the events unfold today. This is Chuck Grassley, Republican from Iowa, the President pro tem of the Senate, saying that a tweet apparently directed to President Trump. The estimate is now that over 35,000 Ukrainian kids have been abducted by Russia. See if Putin will return them home to their families without using them as pawns to trade for something. That will tell you a lot. Chuck Grassley sort of live tweeting his advice to the president as he walks into this negotiation. Can you just talk through a little bit on the Ukrainian children and the abductions issue? I know it's something that you have followed in your studies.
Correct, right. And getting back to the earlier caller mentioning, would there be a possibility that President Trump would use this as a pretext for pressuring President Putin specifically on this issue? Yes, I mean, that is where the international courts have come down hard on President Putin, is going back to 2022 when this started, illegally abducting, not that abductions are ever legal, but illegally abducting Ukrainian children, oftentimes to Belarus, sometimes as a staging ground, or through Belarus over to Russia. There's been reports of indoctrination, and then in some cases then using them to fight on the Russian side. And so it will be interesting if President Trump does bring that up. And again, also the numbers mentioned about the casualties. Again, I think the UN Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights has this very recent report talking about the high number of casualties taking place in Ukraine. So the war, getting back to the ostensible premise for this meeting, which is about a peace treaty, or again, more likely a ceasefire, because that would be the first step towards getting towards an actual peace treaty. But the children who have been abducted, the number of people who have been killed.
And on people that have been killed, there's some numbers this is from the Center for Strategic International Studies. These are the numbers. Some expectation that it could be close to 1 million Russian soldiers that have been killed since February of 2022. And this is just through May, so not even the summer fighting season, and there has been plenty of fighting throughout the summer. Ukraine, the estimate is approximately 400,000. Again, these numbers very hard to determine, but this kind of gives you a ballpark figure. One more social media post from a member of Congress, Dan Sullivan, senator from Alaska, obviously his state hosting today's summit, calling it a historic day. Alaska is the right place for peace talks. Putin understands strength and power. Alaska exudes both, he says. Huge military presence today, the cornerstone of the U.S. missile defense. 100+ fifth-generation fighters, and I believe some of them are parked there on the tarmac waiting as part of the backdrop for the photo ops that are going to happen. The 11th Airborne Division and a major American energy producer. There's the shot. This is where we're expecting the two men will at least have a handshake and a greeting coming off their planes. There's a red carpet leading between the Air Force jets there. The F-22s, I believe, but I'm sure a viewer might correct me who knows their military fighters better. But that's the sort of the setup there that they have for the two presidents getting ready to meet. John in Atlanta, it's line for Republican. Go ahead. We're waiting for President Trump and President Putin.
Hello?
Go ahead, John.
Hey, how's it going? I think, this meeting, I think the purpose of this meeting should be, to produce an enforceable ceasefire that protects the sovereignty of Ukraine and advance our interests here in the U.S. I think we need to see troop withdrawals, the end of all, missile strikes, release of prisoners, and if Russia, refuses this, I think we just have to walk away and start applying economic diplomatic, and energy pressure to, raise the cost of continued aggression. I think there's something important here about defending a post-World War II principle that borders can be changed by force. And success means, peace without concession of territory. Yeah.
Jennifer Wistrand.
Yeah, great comments by the caller. And circling back to one of your earlier comments or questions, wondering what's going to be discussed. There has been a lot in the lead up to this saying that there will be discussion of land swaps, or, will President Trump suggest to President Putin, would you be okay with this much land? And President, Trump saying, and obviously this has been highly criticized because, again, the fact that President Zelensky is not there, and Ukraine's position has very strongly been they will not cede any of their land. And I think the caller makes a very good point. If we live still in a post-World War II international order, which we presumably do, where we have been instructed and have abided by, the protection of the sovereignty of countries, territorial integrity. Obviously, Russia has been allowed to not abide by those rules. I know the guest you had on in the previous segment raised this, but I think it's important to re-mention. I mean, Russia illegally invaded Georgia back in 2008, and then illegally annexed Crimea in 2014, and then the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, and all with the ostensible purposes of acquiring land, among other things. Russia currently occupies about 20% of Georgia, currently occupies about 18% of Ukraine. So getting back to the caller's point, again, it is important for the U.S. and the other Western countries to say, no, going back to post-World War II, we respect international borders, we respect countries' rights to maintain the sovereignty over their state.
And let me show viewers some of the live pictures coming from Anchorage, Alaska. So we had said earlier that we thought the Russian president was on the ground. Actually, that was a second American plane that was landing. This is the plane carrying Russian President Vladimir Putin. So he's just getting ready to land. You can see wheels coming down from his aircraft and getting ready to land. So it'll be a few minutes until the arrival ceremony, and the two men are expected to walk out down that red carpet together. So we will keep showing you those live pictures and keep taking your calls. This is Aryan out of Illinois Independent. Aryan, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm 18 years old. I was in 5th grade when Donald Trump was first elected. He's kind of been the main figure in politics for me. And it's kind of interesting to see his words, his demeanor play out in my life. I'm really inspired by Dr. Ron Paul's message of just ending this idea of forever wars. And I don't know if I can speak on behalf of all of Gen Z, but, this idea of, Trump's idea of his own ego, I respect, deals like Azerbaijan and Armenia, but this idea of just constantly funding these wars doesn't make sense to me. I grew up in a generation where all we're doing is looking at social media. We're seeing horrific images, whether it's from Gaza or Ukraine or, name your atrocity. And, we're worried about things like Social Security, tariffs, retirement. Already we have to think about these things. I know so many people out there who are just sick and tired and worried. So my only concern here is Trump going to be the person who he says he is? Is he going to really put his foot down and listen to what the American people have to say? I know so many people who have voted for President Trump and now are beginning to regret their choices. But long story short, just as someone a part of Gen Z, this is not normalcy. And I'm always surprised when I hear about older generations like you guys yourselves talk about, hey, we used to live in a time where, a tweet wasn't the main source of information. People sat down at a dinner table, people sat together and talked about their differences. And, this idea of hyper-partisan politics is something that just frustrates me more than anything.
Aaron, before you go, you talk about sitting down at a dinner table and discussing differences. So what do you think of this face-to-face meeting today, sitting down? It'll be a 3-on-3 meeting and not the one-on-one that we were expected. But is this a positive development?
I hope so. I hope it's just not a PR stunt. I'm also an Indian American, and this idea of Donald Trump putting in his fingers into foreign affairs and whether or not he has the final say is kind of something up in the air. I think Putin does fear him in the sense where Donald Trump is an unpredictable person, and from a foreign affairs standpoint, that may or may not be good. If you want an immediate ceasefire, I think the logical step would be for obviously Zelensky to give up occupied territory. I know he really doesn't want to do that, but I guess from a Gen Z perspective, if Donald Trump is listening to us, we just, at the very maximum, a humanitarian aid is the only thing we would allow.
That's Arian out of Illinois, and you're seeing live photos from Anchorage, Alaska, at Elmendorf-Richardson Air Base. It's on the north side of Anchorage, and President Putin's plane is pulling in. The caller talked about among his comments, the money that has been spent here. Some numbers on that: the United States aid to Ukraine in various forms, totaling just under $200 billion. It started right after the war began in March of 2022, the first sort of tranche of money, $14 billion going to Ukraine, and has continued steadily. It picked up toward the end of the Biden administration, some $81 billion or so in the final 8 months of the Biden administration. A chart from the Council on Foreign Relations showing the United States spending, it's starting to be matched by the EU institutions and the spending. But can you just talk through the spending and how that's changed under Donald Trump?
Sure, and just I want to underscore what you said too. Great comments by the caller. So someone, a young person calling in and obviously tracking all these issues from a economic to a humanitarian and otherwise. So, and I think he was specifically underscoring, his generation being concerned about the U.S. spending money elsewhere and perhaps not in the United States on Social Security and other things. So wise comments that he was making. In terms of the amounts that have been spent, you're right. There's been, I believe, 5 bills that have been specifically focused on the Ukraine war. The number I've seen a lot is 175 billion that the U.S. has committed in spending to it. The U.S. has given significant amount, but the European nations, if you put them collectively, have also as well. And it's difficult to disentangle spending. You can look at, NATO contributions. You can look at individual countries. Like I said, you can look at the European nations collectively as a Europe. But the U.S. has committed quite a bit more so than it has to almost any other conflict, I believe, in the last 50 years.
And then how that's changed under Donald Trump in terms of how the money is eventually getting to Ukraine, or at least the material that is eventually getting to Ukraine.
Right. Excellent. Thank you for reminding me of the other half of your question. Right. Prior to the second administration of Donald Trump, under the previous President Biden, it was more money was allocated. Under President Trump, there's been more of a push to say that there needs to be some kind of agreement. So if you go back to February, you had the agreement with Ukraine, the minerals deal, right? Saying that if the U.S. is going to continue to fund Ukraine in the financial, military, and humanitarian ways, which has been the breakdown, that Ukraine should in return do something for the United States, granting it access to these critical minerals or rare earth minerals. There's also been push to say that some of this should be loans, not just straight out aid. So it's been a different approach to helping Ukraine than was under the previous administration.
A side-by-side shot now of Air Force One and then Russian President Vladimir Putin's jet that has just landed, and the walkway being set up there. So we're expecting the two presidents to come out here momentarily. We do know that President Trump, along with his aides from the White House, is joined on Air Force One by Mike Dunleavy, the governor of Alaska, by the two Alaskan Republican senators, Lisa Murkowski and Dan Sullivan, so we may see them come down the walkway here. The flags are out and the military escort is lined up, so we're expecting it momentarily, and we'll keep showing you live pictures here on C-SPAN. Stay with us all afternoon as we cover this historic summit, and we take your phone calls and hear from you, asking you what you're expecting from today's meeting. This is Charles in Tampa, Florida, Democrat. Charles, go ahead.
Hi. I'd like to say that I'm 81 years old, and I heard your 18-year-old caller and I was just so impressed of his grasp of politics, and it makes me feel great for the generations coming. What I did not expect was the stage that Donald Trump has set. These are peace talks, yet he has the stage flanked with 4 fighter jets menacingly close. So Putin has to walk that red carpet right past the noses of those 4 fighter jets. It's either over the top or it's masterful. I don't know which. So thank you for taking my call.
Charles, thanks for pointing out that observation.
Yeah, that is a great observation. I second the caller's remarks. I, too, am incredibly impressed by the 18-year-old's comments, but incredibly impressed equally by the 81-year-old's comments. I agree. There's a lot of symbolism we can draw from this, right? I think it was one of the tweets you showed earlier from a representative talking about Alaska being the right place because of military history, but also energy history. And I think that was a good point we didn't bring up earlier, right? Obviously, energy politics figures quite a bit into the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and then how the West has approached it and the U.S. has approached Russia vis-a-vis sanctions. So I think the caller makes a very good point about having a very pronounced military dimension in the red carpet walkway. Maybe getting back to one of the earlier callers' questions or comments about could this be a pretext for emphasizing the International Criminal Court's warrant that's out for Putin. We don't know, but the caller makes a very good point.
It's F-22 Raptors that are lined up there, and we actually, some of the pool pictures from earlier showed to at least 2 F-22 Raptors flying over the Air Force base, sort of on patrol, I would assume, ahead of this meeting. So certainly a military presence here in Anchorage at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson ahead of these peace talks when it comes to the war in Ukraine. Live photos and live video showing you the Russian president's plane there, and we await sort of the arrival ceremony. It was supposed to take place 3 p.m. Eastern time, so it could be any minute now. We'll keep taking your phone calls. Jake is in Jackson, Mississippi, Republican. Go ahead.
Hey, good afternoon. I wanted to piggyback off of what the previous gentleman just said. I'd like to vote that it was a part of masterclass putting those F-22 Raptors there. What other chance are we going to give to show Putin the other end, firsthand, American firepower, that if he continues this war, his men will see on the battlefield? And for my fellow American from Illinois, he made a great point about partisanship. How many senators have hundreds of years between them experience dealing with Russia, and they could come together to put together a proposal that Trump could take with him to Alaska? Instead, they're sinking back into their aisles of partisanship. I'd really like to see what Russia would want from Ukraine in concessions, especially with land. What's the price point that they're willing to pay? That's my question.
Any thoughts?
Good question in terms of, what does Russia want? I mean, you can look at the big, 30,000-foot picture going back to the late 1990s when President Putin stated that the collapse of the Soviet Union, which took place in December of 1991, was the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century. And that one of his goals throughout his decades-long tenure now as president has been to, in some way, shape, or form, reconstitute the Soviet Union. As I mentioned earlier, he did illegally invade Georgia in 2008. Georgia is a former Soviet republic. He occupies about 20% of that country. The illegal invasion of Ukraine, another former Soviet republic. So he is effectively going into various former Soviet republics. In terms of what will he accept? I mean, we've heard that he will say, allow me to maintain the 18 to 20% I have in southeastern Ukraine, which is parts of 4 provinces there. Again, President Zelensky has unequivocally stated that he will not cede any of Ukraine's territories. So I don't know. It'll be interesting if this does become part of the discussion today. Again, that could change the calculus of this whole discussion. Obviously, President Zelensky would be, rightfully so, very upset if discussion about his country's territory were on the table and he wasn't there.
There's a map in today's Wall Street Journal that talks about the 4 regions that you're talking about: Luhansk, Donetsk that we've heard about for so long, Zaporizhzhia, am I saying that correctly?
Yeah.
Kherson, and then of course Crimea, that has been occupied since 2014. It is Luhansk that's almost 100% occupied by Russia. Donetsk, though, it's more about 76% occupied by Russia. And these are sort of the major four regions that are part of these negotiations, or at least could be a part of negotiations for land swaps. And as you said, President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine saying this shouldn't even be on the table right now. We're awaiting, the doors are open on the Russian president's plane, and we are awaiting the arrival ceremony. We'll keep taking your phone calls. This is Edward out of Aurora, Colorado, independent. Edward, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How are you? First of all, history. We should take a look at history. I think we should take a look at history as, and I agree with almost all of the callers that have come in. They have spoken about things that our senators and congressmen and women should be thinking about right now. But looking at our history, after World War II, a lot of the land, a lot of the countries were broken up. A lot of things that are troubling our world today came about after World War II. Iran, China, the Soviet Union. A lot of those countries, a lot of those companies were on the especially Iran was on the move to become a democratic country, and the United States and Great Britain stepped in, if we can look at the history. Now, as far as what's going on in Alaska today, I did some research on President Trump before he became president, and he's not a great politician. He's a great, supposedly, businessman. And as we know, a business is not a democracy. And as far as Putin is concerned, Putin was the leader of the KGB in Russia. Okay, so we have a businessman looking in the eyes of a security or spy. And we all know that a spy can just trump a Trump. Pardon the joke there, I guess. But what I would expect, or what I would like to see today in Alaska, is President Putin to, stop the bombing. And I would like to see President Trump to take a look at not just
former director of Russia's Federal Security Services and service in the Soviet KGB intelligence service for 16 years. That's his background. The two men walking down their respective red carpets, and we're expecting them to meet at that point between those F-22 Raptors. What did you want to add as we watch these pictures together?
So many. It's just it's a bit of an overwhelming image to be watching, right? The two presidents coming and to be coming on U.S. soil for a summit like this. I'm not sure I can add anything to what you said. I do want to underscore the caller that called in made some really great points, and the point about you have a businessman meeting a former KGB intel officer, and that's an interesting point to make, and it's very apt, right? So you've got different perspectives, maybe getting back at, we're not quite sure what we're going to see taking place in this 3-on-3 discussion.
And the 3-on-3, at least from the American side, we know that it's President Trump who's going to be joined by Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff, the special envoy. Who would be your expectation for the other two that would be joining Vladimir Putin? I would assume
Sergei Lavrov, his foreign minister, so would be the counterpart to our Secretary of State Marco Rubio. I think it'll be interesting to see who the other person is. Is it a close aide, or is it, again, one of the finance minister, defense minister?
As we watch these pictures, who sets up these meetings? How do they happen as we see the handshake now between President Trump and Vladimir Putin and the military coming to salute there? How did these conferences come together?
That's a great question. Generally, if there are months in the planning, and you'd have a lot of people involved. So, for example, if it's in a third-party state, for example, the Helsinki meeting of 2018, you would have had the U.S. ambassador actively involved. In this case, I think it was interesting you mentioned that also on board, I believe you said on board the plane, was the governor of Alaska and the 2 Alaska senators, who I presume Alaska was very much involved in how this would take place. But you would have, high level, certainly ambassadors for the respective countries would be involved in the planning.
The pictures coming in live from Anchorage, Alaska. It's 54 degrees Fahrenheit on the ground. It looks to be a little overcast there, as we saw as the planes were coming in, and here stepping up on the stage, President Trump and Vladimir Putin for their photo opportunity. This is the greeting that's happened. We'll try to listen in for a moment to hear what it sounds like there out on the tarmac.
Mr. Putin, did you underestimate Ukraine? President Putin, will you stop killing civilians? President Putin, how can the U.S. trust your word?
Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Let's go. Let's go. Come on, guys.
Press corps there shouting questions, mostly to Vladimir Putin. And the one that came through clearly, President Putin, will you stop killing civilians? The two men headed to their briefing were expected in about a half an hour. They call it a pool photo opportunity. That could be a point where President Trump talks to the press. He likes to do that. He may even take a few questions. You see, they did not there at this arrival ceremony, just sort of a brief photo op and then into their cars to the place where they're going to be meeting. It's all happening there on the base, though. It's not a long drive. Taking your phone calls, want to get your reaction to this moment, the first time in 6 years that President Trump and Vladimir Putin meeting, and they are meeting on U.S. soil at a joint U.S. military base. This is Joseph in Fort Wayne, Indiana, independent. Go ahead.
Hi, I appreciate y'all having me on, and it's been a pleasure listening to all the other callers. I guess I just have two statements in regards to this meeting. Is one, I would really hope that there would be a reinforcement for a peace in Ukraine. I would really like there to be a reassertment of the sort of democratic order that sort of existed since the end of World War II. I know there's a lot of challenges with that, and it's not just Ukraine. In my personal view, though, I do see the invasion of Ukraine as a direct challenge to the global democratic order, which has kind of kept the peace since the end of the last World War. And, second of all, and it's kind of hard for me to say this because I feel like that I'm taking the attention away from Ukraine, is I'm hoping that there can be some segue into some serious conversations about reinforcing and expanding arms control. I know a lot of those treaties have expired, and I know that also technology has changed since those treaties were created. I hope that we can, that us and the Russians can start discussing that again and start taking it seriously.
Jennifer Winstrand.
No, great comments by the caller. His first point about, reasserting the democratic order that we've had since the post-World War II period, and he's right. That's come up a lot over the past 3 years, right? Part of the big push in that post-1945 to 1950, when all of these UN agencies were created and other agencies, and this idea that we need to have liberal here in the lowercase l, institutions that can be checks on one another, so we don't have countries unequivocal, just invading one another. And so I think he's right to emphasize that should be on discussion. Also right, I think the arms control, that's been brought up, that could be one of the points that either President Trump or President Putin raised. Obviously, periodically over the past 3 years, President Putin has used the fact that he does have nuclear capabilities and other capabilities, you know, kind of wave that in the face of people and use that as a threat, whereas if it is a country that wasn't nuclear armed, that wouldn't be a comparable threat. So I think, again, the caller makes two very good points of things that hopefully will get discussed.
President Trump and President Putin are on their way to their bilateral meeting. It's not just a one-on-one meeting, though. We learned after the two planes landed from the press pool there, that it's going to be a 3-on-3 meeting, the initial meeting, and then could expand to more after that. So we're watching, been showing you live pictures this afternoon, and we're going to be doing it throughout the course of these talks. But President Trump spoke to reporters aboard Air Force One earlier today and set some of his own expectations for today's meeting. We want to show you that discussion he had with the press. It's just about 5 or 6 minutes long. This was from earlier today.
I brought a friend of yours, Brett Baer. He's here. Brett, how you doing? How are you?
What will make a success of this summit today?
I can't tell you that. I don't know. It's there's nothing set in stone. I want certain things. I want to see a ceasefire. This is not to do with Europe. Europe's not telling me what to do. But they're going to be involved in the process, obviously, as will Zelensky. But I want to see a ceasefire rapidly. I don't know if it's going to be today, but I'm not going to be happy if it's not today. Everyone said it can't be today, but I'm just saying I want the killing to stop. I'm in this to stop the killing. You know, we're not putting up any money. We're making money. They're buying our weapons, and we're sending them to NATO, and NATO's sending us big, beautiful checks. But that I don't care about that. I care about it was a big factor when Biden spent $350 billion and got nothing. But what I do care about is they lost last week 7,011 people were lost, almost all soldiers. 36 people in a town which got hit by a missile, but over 7,000 soldiers. It's crazy.
Could you describe a little bit, Mr. President, because I know you've had a lot of phone calls with President Putin. What's the difference in a face-to-face, in-person meeting?
Look, he's a smart guy, been doing it for a long time, but so have I. Been doing it for a long time. And here we are with President. That was much more difficult than what I'm doing today, believe me. So we get along. There's a good respect level on both sides. And I think, you know, something's going to come of it. I noticed he's bringing a lot of business people from Russia. And that's good. I like that because they want to do business, but they're not doing business until we get the war settled.
Are you going to talk about
business? We have the hottest country on earth. We have the hottest economy on earth. We have the hottest country. We just set a new stock market record again. We have hundreds of billions of dollars flowing in from tariffs. We're the hottest. We were a dead country, dead like doornails, a dead country. 1 year ago, we were dead as a doornail, and now we have the hottest country. And he wants a piece of that because his country is not hot economically. In fact, it's the opposite. And China's not doing well economically, but we're all, look, I want everybody to do well. The war's got to stop and the killing's got to stop.
Mr. President, what do you stop? Thank you for coming back to take questions. We saw that Russia continued its violence into Ukraine last night, launching even more drones. What did you make of that?
I think they're trying to negotiate. He's trying to set a stage. I mean, in his mind, that helps him make a better deal. It actually hurts him. But in his mind, that helps him make a better deal if they can continue the killing. Maybe it's a part of the world. Maybe it's just his fabric, his genes, his genetics. But he thinks that makes him, gives him strength in negotiating. I think it hurts him, but I'll be talking to him about it later.
It's on the table for discussions today, Mr. President. Are the territorial swaps on the table? Will you be discussing that?
No, they'll be discussed, but I've got to let Ukraine make that decision. And I think they'll make a proper decision. But I'm not here to negotiate for Ukraine. I'm here to get them at a table. And I think you have two sides. Look, Vladimir Putin wanted to take all of Ukraine. If I wasn't president, he would right now be taking all of Ukraine. But he's not going to do it.
Mr. President, what did you mean?
Just one. What about the possibility United States providing security guarantees to Ukraine.
Maybe, along with Europe and other countries. Not in the form of NATO, because that's not going to, there are certain things that aren't going to happen. But, yeah, along with Europe, there's a possibility of that.
Mr. President, the number of business people that President Putin is bringing along, is that something that you want to discuss with President Putin at this meeting?
If we make progress, I would discuss it, because that's one of the things that they would like. They'd like to get a piece of what I built in terms of the economy. Just so you know, we were a dead country with our economy. He wouldn't be interested. He wouldn't have been interested a year ago with the Biden economy. But he is interested in the Trump economy, because wait till you see when those factories start opening up. We have hundreds of factories all over the country, and that includes auto factories, AI factories, and every other. They're all coming in because they want to beat the tariffs. Because if they open here, they don't have to pay tariffs. If they don't open here, they have to pay, in some cases, 200%, 300%. I haven't even set some of the tariffs yet. I'll be setting tariffs next week and the week after on steel and on, I would say, chips. Chips and semiconductors we'll be setting sometime next week, week after.
What are you looking at? What rate?
I'm going to have a rate that is going to be lower at the beginning. Then that gives them a chance to come in and build, and very high after a certain period of time. And if they don't build here, they have to pay a very high tariff, which doesn't work, so they'll come and build.
Mr. President, hi. You had said earlier...
Is he over there? Isn't he a gentleman?
He's helping me out.
He's a very nice, he's one of the few nice ones, actually.
You had said earlier this week that Putin would face severe consequences if you get the sense from him that he's not interested. What do you mean by that?
Economically severe. Yes, it will be very severe. I'm not doing this for my health, okay? I don't need it. I'd like to focus on our country, but I'm doing this to save a lot of lives. Yeah, very severe. Thank you very much, everybody.
That was President Trump earlier today aboard Air Force One on his way to Anchorage for today's summit. He flew 3,376 miles from Washington, D.C. to just north of Anchorage, Alaska, to the joint base there for today's summit. President Putin flew 4,343 miles from Moscow to make it to today's summit. He also spoke about the summit briefly before leaving the Kremlin. This is President Putin from yesterday.
To tell you about the stage we are at with the current American administration, which, as everyone knows, is making, in my opinion, quite energetic and sincere efforts to stop the hostilities, stop the crisis, and reach agreements that are of interest to all parties involved in this conflict in order to create long-term conditions for peace between our countries and in Europe and in the world as a whole. If by the next stages we reach agreements in the area of control over strategic offensive weapons.
President Vladimir Putin, again, his comments before leaving for today's meeting. We are taking your comments, allowing you to join this conversation as we all watch together. You can join the conversation throughout on phone lines for Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. Republicans, it's 202-748-8920. Democrats, 202-748-8921. Independents, 202-748-8922. And we will look for your text messages as well. That number, if you want to text us, 202-748-8903. We'll hear from Chase, Allentown, Pennsylvania, Republican. Chase, good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon. How you guys doing?
Doing well. What are your thoughts so far on this summit?
Well, first off, this is really the first time that I've ever, paid so much attention to politics. And
this call will be recorded.
Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, Chase, I guess you're recording the call, but go ahead.
Oh, my bad. Yeah, no. I don't really know what to say, really, but yeah, the war's just been going on for a few years now, and I'm sort of not really understanding, the role that, the U.S. exactly plays in, whether or not, two entirely different countries, when they go into war, how they're responsible for whether or not like I just have so many questions because, I mean, I just don't really understand how we're necessarily involved and why.
Well, Jennifer Wistrand, maybe you can take us back here and maybe even before 2022 for U.S. involvement and Russia-Ukrainian relations and how they've evolved perhaps since the breakup of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, no, great question by the caller. You know, basically saying, and I think a lot of people, you know,
how did we get here?
How did we get here? Why are we even having the summit? What's that? So it's a great question, and it does necessitate a bit of a look back in history. So on the one hand, you have the Russia and Ukraine relationship. Russia, you can go back centuries, right, and look at the relationship between what this is before. And a lot of people have made the points about, you know, the post-World War II order and nation states, right, and how that's created a lot of the conflict because we have to respect borders that are different than borders that there were at prior times. But most immediately, if we go back, you know, December of 1991, that's when the Soviet Union collapsed. And that produced 15 new countries, Russia and Ukraine being two of those 15. And the Soviet Union had come into being back in 1917 following the Russian Revolution. And what we now know as Russia and Ukraine were two of the initial parts of the Soviet Union. So Russia and Ukraine were in it.
Two of the largest parts.
Yeah, two of the largest parts and in there from the beginning until the end. And we could get into discussions about language and culture and history and all that, and relationships between the two peoples. But in terms of more concretely, and I think what the caller is getting at, why are we, the United States, involved? A lot of Western countries. Yes.
And let me go live to the discussion here, and we're going to come back to that. But this is live pictures from Anchorage.
Mr. Putin, will you agree to a ceasefire? Mr. Putin, will you commit to not killing any more civilians?
Come on, guys.
Mr. President, President Putin, why should President Trump trust your word now? After all,
Thank you, press. Thank you, press.
We've got to go.
Thank you, press.
Thank you, press.
Thank you, press.
Thank you, press. Thank you, press.
And we're watching along with you, our viewers. So a very brief pool spray, as they call it, a brief photo op there, so the networks can get videos of the two meeting together. They're going in to that 3-on-3 meeting. Who did you see sitting there with President Trump and President Putin?
I confess all I caught, I saw Secretary of State Marco Rubio and then the Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. That's who my eyes focused on. I didn't see from the Russian side who was there.
Right, and they are now expected to go into talks, and we don't know how long they're going to go. But we are going to follow the developments, and we are going to take viewer calls, and we're going to see what's happening today from some new news reporting from reporters on the ground, some quotes coming in for the expanded bilateral meeting and lunch. Rubio, Witkoff, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent will be there. The Commerce Secretary, Secretary Lutnick will be there. Pete Hegseth, the Defense Secretary, Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, expected to also join. That's the expanded meeting, the lunch meeting after this sort of initial 3-on-3. That's some of the latest reporting. We knew it was going to be sort of a smaller meeting at the beginning and then expanding out, and then perhaps a news conference later this evening that we can all watch together. But again, we're learning all of this and watching it all together and taking your phone calls. It is Alejandro waiting in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, independent. Alejandro, what do you think of what you've seen so far?
Hey, good afternoon, John. You know, it's just, I think what we have to recognize here is that the Ukrainians, they are not going to win this war. I think I have a family member, he used to work at the State Department. But anyway, he was telling me that the war is essentially the only reason that the Ukrainians have not completely lost all their territory is because they fought like hell, right? The Russians, they should really, if you compare their two militaries, the Russians should have almost complete control over Ukraine. But the Ukrainians have fought very well. They really put all their might into it. And so we're here at this point where I don't know what the exact percentage is, but I think it's about 25% of Ukraine right now, something like that, is occupied by the Russians right now. And essentially what the Russians probably want, or at least President Trump wants, is that we just end the war where it's at right now. That the battle lines that are drawn right now, that's anything that's Russian stays as Russian territory, and anything that's Ukrainian stays Ukrainian territory. The problem is the Ukrainians don't want to give up the land that the Russians have claimed, right? They're very patriotic people. They don't want to just submit and surrender and give the Russians this territory. And the Russians, on the other hand, they want even more than what they currently have. Right, so I think the summit is kind of just trying to figure out what can we, what kind of lines can we draw here to bring an end to this war? Because it's just terrible. I mean, the lines have barely moved in, 2 years or a year, something like that. But just so many people are dying, and it's just terrible. And I really do. I think President Trump is the worst president we've ever had. But I do commend him for this because he's certainly doing a lot more than President Biden, who I don't think was very great either. But he's certainly doing a lot more than President Biden and a lot of other world leaders have been able to do. And I do think that is helped by his, as we all know, he had a very close relationship with President Putin. He kind of, with that summit they had in the first term, he's always spoke very highly of him. And I just hope that we can find some sort of agreement here, because this is just, so many people are dying, and it's terrible.
It's Alejandro in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Let you respond to him, and maybe it helps bring us back to the other caller's question about how we got here.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking the same thing, that we didn't get a chance to finish the previous caller's question, which was talking about how we got here. And I think this point about territory is key. Part of why the West felt an obligation to come to Ukraine's defense is, if we go back to the breakup of the Soviet Union in December 1991, Ukraine, we forget, had nuclear weapons as well, and it agreed to give them up, right, for security guarantees that were never strictly enforced. And so the West felt an obligation once Russia invaded Ukraine to come to its defense, because presumably Russia would have been less likely to invade Ukraine if it was a nuclear-armed superpower as well, which it wasn't post-1991. And so getting at the second caller's questions about territory, that has been brought up a lot in this discussion. Russia saying that, and we brought up the maps earlier, and we talked about these 4 provinces in the southeast, and the caller said 25%. I think the number that's been more recently used is about 18%, but regardless of the number, it's whether it's 1%, whether it's 95%, that's considered Ukraine's territory that Russia's occupying. So I think that territory will be a big issue. Again, relating back to the earlier caller's comments about our post-World War II order, where we said we were going to respect boundaries. The big thing with the breakup of the Soviet Union was respecting the boundaries. Those 15 new countries that were previous former republics, there was an obligation to respect boundaries. And so this all goes back to with Russia invading Georgia, Russia invading Ukraine, not respecting what happened at the breakup of the Soviet Union, but also not respecting the post-World War II liberal order.
You've taught about this area, this region at Miami of Ohio, teaching about it again at Georgetown, studied it at the Wilson Institute. What is your expectation? What is your gut feeling when it comes to specifically the land issue? Is Ukraine going to have to give up some of its territory to Russia to end this war? Is Russia willing to pull back in some of the places that is conquered by force? What is your expectation as you've watched this over the course of the months and years?
I think it's unlikely that Russia will pull out of Ukraine unless somehow forced to, given that it hasn't pulled out elsewhere that it's gone into. So I think it's unlikely unless somehow its economic situation were to get to a point where it felt it had to. And again, there's a great report out of Bloomberg and others in the last couple of days talking about the combined Western sanctions and then the wartime economy that President Putin himself has instituted, that they are finally starting to have very significant impacts on Russia's economy. And so I suppose it's possible that Russia could be induced to withdraw from Ukraine, although I think that's unlikely. And I think what is much more likely is that Russia will negotiate very strongly to be able to keep this 18% of the southeastern Ukraine. And I think that's why you see the European counterparts not only feeling pressure to increase their spending in NATO, but also thinking back, and they have a much closer border with Russia, right? Estonia and the other countries, Poland, they have a history with Russia, right? They can go back over the centuries and see where their land was invaded or their land was controlled.
You talk about sanctions. One thing we haven't talked about over the course of the past hour and a half or so, as we have been showing live pictures from the summit, is the Sanctioning Russia Act of 2025, Lindsey Graham's bill here, a very tough sanctions regimen, how it's played into what Donald Trump has said he might do, what Congress is asking President Trump to do when it comes to Russia. Here are just some of the provisions, and this is all congress.gov. As C-SPAN viewers probably know the website. You can look up, you can find brief summaries of some very long bills out there. But this bill, Lindsey Graham's bill, it was introduced back in April of this year. This bill would find that the president would impose visa and property blocking sanctions on specific persons, such as the Russian President Vladimir Putin, certain Russian military commanders, any foreign person that knowingly provides defense items to the Russian armed forces. The bill would ensure that the president would increase the rate of duty on all goods and services imported from Russia into the United States to 500% relative to the value of such goods. The president must increase the rate of duty on all goods and services imported into the United States from countries that knowingly engage in exchange of Russian origin uranium and petroleum products to 500%. The Department of Treasury would impose property blocking sanctions on any financial institution organized under Russian law and owned wholly or partly by Russia, and any financial institution that engages in transactions with those entities. One more, the Department of Commerce would prohibit the export or re-export or in-country transfer to or in Russia of any U.S.-produced energy or energy product. This seen as a really strict sanctions bill that Lindsey Graham was pushing the president to impose on Russia. How did that impact the negotiations, and what was the White House reaction when Lindsey Graham rolled this out?
Yeah, and I'm glad you went through the different provisions for everyone, because you're right, it is a very strict sanctions bill attempting, I think, again, when initial sanctions were put in place a couple years ago, people in the West assumed it would have a much more significant impact more quickly, and it, again, I think those who study the sanctions say that they are having an impact. Maybe it wasn't as fast or as obvious as people anticipated, but I think that this is maybe an attempt to be more thorough in the way the sanctions are, and getting at more of these secondary sanctions, right? So it's not just targeting Russia, although those provisions very much focus about that, but what President Trump has talked about, and I think he mentioned even on that clip that was shown when he was on the plane, is, targeting others, right? And I mentioned earlier, like in India, which has consistently been buying Russian, oil, natural gas. Other countries that have supplied, a lot of the former Soviet republics in the South Caucasus, Central Asia, have been, sanction havens for Russians. So trying to get more broadly and cut off Russia on all angles, presumably getting back to the impetus for this so that Trump can negotiate a peace deal between the two if he's got Russia in a place where he feels it has to be because of economics.
It's Lindsey Graham's bill. This is Dan Sullivan from Today, the Republican senator from Alaska. He joined President Trump on Air Force One on this trip to his state. Dan Sullivan tweeting this out, saying Putin is coming to the table because of the threat of serious secondary sanctions. We're in a position of power, bringing him to the United States soil for peace talks. He sees our military strength, and certainly saw it in those F-22 Raptors there on the tarmac, our energy dominance, many allies, and a president who knows how to negotiate and make peace. Alaska Senator Republican Dan Sullivan with his X posting today just before 2 p.m. Eastern, just as the president was getting ready to land in Anchorage there for the talks. This is Ryan waiting in Florida, independent. Ryan, what are your thoughts on what you've seen so far?
Hi, good afternoon there. Thank you for taking my call. My question was just if you all think this is a good strategy for the U.S. when it comes to ending the war with Ukraine. My personal fear is that this is going to be bolstering Putin, as he's been isolated, not really able to visit any countries due to fear of, arrest due to the ICC warrant. And I don't think this talk is going to be constructive as Zelensky's not there, so I don't think it's going to be possible for them to have a comprehensive deal where they actually come to a solution. So I feel what's going to happen is Putin's going to go back home with no deal made, and what he's going to get out of it is just bolster his image internally, and possibly due to the U.S. starting to host him in our country, that other countries across the world will host him as well, and it'll just be sort of a normalization. And I'd just like to know what your opinion is on that. Thank you.
Thanks for that. As we can show you, and we'll certainly let you respond to Ryan, but we can show you the stage where the two presidents are expected to speak later today whenever these negotiations, this 3-on-3 ends. You can see the Russian flag there, the U.S. flags pursuing peace there between the two podiums where the two gentlemen will stand, and obviously plenty of seats for the press. But go ahead to the caller's points.
No, very good points, and I think just the premise of, is this a good strategy? I appreciate the fact that he raised, you know, we've been so much focusing on the economics, the defense, the nuclear, but just circling back to, is this a win for Putin simply by being invited by a U.S. president to U.S. soil to have a one-on-one meeting? And I do think there is an element to that. It could be that one of Putin's big aims in this is simply to get that invitation to be re-invited onto the international stage. And as the caller used the word normalization, I think there's a potentiality of that, right? Does this normalize the fact now that Putin can re-engage in the West and have one-on-one meetings? Will we see Germany, the UK, France suddenly having similar meetings? And does it just get us back to a pre-2022 where, emphasizing again some of the earlier callers' comments, then do we forget about the territory and forget about all of this? Does that become secondary to these other elements? So I think it's a good question. Is it a good strategy? We'll see based on what comes out of today's series of meetings. But certainly, I think Putin, in some respect, has already won by getting this invitation and being here.
Certainly no expectation of a peace deal coming out of today's meeting. It could be a ceasefire. It could be working towards a ceasefire. We don't know what's going to come out of this. Since Volodymyr Zelensky is not involved, and the bigger peace deal that President Trump has promised in the 2024 campaign that he would bring together, since that's not likely to come out of today, there was one of the morning reports, I think it was the Washington Post this morning, asked the question, could this meeting have been an email? Does this meeting need to happen? Is President Putin getting more out of this meeting than President Trump? You spoke a little bit to that, but what are your thoughts on that? Could this meeting have been an email?
Yeah, that's great, or a text or a tweet or something, right? Yeah, I suppose, but I think that's where, you know, when we get in all the minutiae of this, are they going to discuss this? Are they going to discuss that? Are they going to discuss that? We forget the optics are really important. Getting back to the caller pointing out, you know, walking down the red carpet with the fighter jets there, and I think, sure, you could have had a discussion or a phone call, right? A multi-party phone call, meeting out different aspects of it. You're right to underscore, and I think you pointed out, it's pursuing peace is the title, right above the ultimate discussion that they're going to have. It's not achieving peace, right? Achieving peace is going to take quite a while. This is hopefully a step towards a peace process, and we have to remember any type of peace agreement, successful ones, go through multiple stages, right? Ideally, we would get a ceasefire agreement out of this, and then you'd have, you know, an interim agreement or pre-negotiation. You know, you'd have multiple stages before you get to anything type of comprehensive framework peace agreement. So I do think all of this, we need to look at all this, the optics, the shots, the words that are used, because it's all part of it, right? It's not just the substance of, or what's the talking points that are discussed.
Let me go to Christine, Goshen, New York, Democrat. Thanks for waiting. Your thoughts on what you've seen so far?
So I just feel like this summit has nothing to do with actually bringing peace to Ukraine. It has everything to do with the blackmail that Putin has on Trump. It's about, you know, Putin getting whatever he wants from Trump to the point where we're willing to give away our mineral rights in Alaska, in one of our states, for a war that we're not involved in. We're giving it to the invading force. Here's the thing. The Epstein files were stored on a SharePoint server, so the 1,000 FBI agents could comb through them and, you know, find all the times that Donald Trump's name was definitely not mentioned. The same time that those files were stored there, SharePoint had a hack that allowed unauthorized access to those servers. Russia also accessed our national court filing systems. They have the files, and they're using it to pressure him. My question, I guess, is, does this fall in line with the pattern of behavior of Russia, you know, blackmailing other powerful figures? And I don't like
well,
what
Christine,
are we doing?
Christine, got your point, got your question. Jennifer Wistrand, give you a chance to respond.
I'm not, the caller's question, is this an opportunity for President Putin to blackmail President Trump? Again, until we know what's discussed in the meetings, we don't know, right?
People were asking that question after the 2018, the Helsinki meeting, and can you just go back and remind people once again about what happened at that meeting, why it concerned so many folks coming out of it, and why was President Trump meeting with President Putin in Helsinki to begin with?
Right. No, very good to circle
this is
back
2018.
to this. 2018, one-on-one summit in the third country, right? In this case, in Helsinki, Finland, between President Trump and President Putin. And getting back to your underscoring that today's meeting moved from a one-on-one to a three-on-three back. One of the criticisms of the meeting that took place back in Helsinki was that it was a one-on-one meeting, and that this was a time when the U.S. was going through in the post-2016 election where there was a lot of criticism that Russia had been able to infiltrate the U.S. Election and sabotage Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's, Senator Clinton's campaign, and that in this Helsinki discussion, President Trump backtracked on that, questioned the intelligence reporting on that, and seemed to side with Russia, where they said, this is all just hyperbole on your part. And then in the days afterwards, Trump walked back his comments, effectively apologizing for having taken the Russian perspective and not the U.S. intelligence perspective. So coming out of that summit, I think part of what the caller was getting at is this just another opportunity for Russia somehow to put the U.S. president on a stage and somehow get him to commit to saying things that are going to anger the U.S. population and look like they're siding with Russia, so that gives Russia a stronger position with respect to bargaining, should there be bargaining that takes place between it and Ukraine. So I think caller raises a good point. Who is behind, and back to your earlier question, who sets up summits, right? What's the objective of having a summit? Who kind of sets the playbill for it? This one has come about much more quickly than a lot of high-level summits do, and therefore I think we just don't know precisely what's going to be discussed.
And we will come back live to this summit when new developments happen. But let me take viewers back to 2018. At the end of the Helsinki summit, a press conference, a bilateral press conference, as I call them, between President Trump and President Putin. It was about 45 minutes long. Let's show it to our viewers. You can watch what happened. This is 7 years ago, July 16th of 2018. This you can watch in its entirety on C-SPAN.
Спасибо большое. Thank you so much. Мы можем начать работать, как я понимаю. Shall we start working, I guess? Уважаемый господин президент, distinguished Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, negotiations with the President of the United States, Donald Trump, took place in a frank and business-like atmosphere. I think we can call it a success and a very fruitful round of negotiations. We carefully analyzed the current status, the present and the future of the Russia-United States relationship, key issues of the global agenda. It's quite clear to everyone that the bilateral relationship are going through a complicated stage, and yet those impediments, the current tension, the tense atmosphere, essentially have no solid reason behind it. The Cold War is a thing of past. The era of acute ideological confrontation of the two countries is a thing of remote past, is a vestige of the past. The situation of the world changed dramatically. Today, both Russia and the United States face a whole new set of challenges. Those include a dangerous maladjustment of mechanisms for maintaining international security and stability, regional crises, the creeping threats of terrorism and transnational crime. It's the snowballing problems in the economy, environmental risks, and other sets of challenges. We can only cope with these challenges if we join the ranks and work together. Hopefully, we will reach this understanding with our American partners. Today's negotiations reflected our joint wish with President Trump to redress this negative situation in the bilateral relationship, outline the first steps for improving this relationship to restore the acceptable level of trust and going back to the previous level of interaction on all mutual interest issues. As major nuclear powers, we bear special responsibility for maintaining international security. And it is vital, and we mentioned this during the negotiations, it's crucial that we fine-tune the dialogue on strategic stability and global security and non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. We submitted our American colleagues a note with a number of specific suggestions. We believe it necessary to work together further on to interact on the disarmament agenda, military and technical cooperation. This includes the extension of the strategic offensive arms limitation treaty. It's the dangerous situation with the global American anti-missile defense system. It's the implementation issues with the INF treaty. And of course, the agenda of non-placement of weapons in space. We favor the continued cooperation in counterterrorism and maintaining cybersecurity. And I'd like to point out specifically that our special services are cooperating quite successfully together. The most recent example is their operational cooperation within the recently concluded World Football Cup. In general, the contacts among the special services should be put to a system-wide basis, should be brought to a systemic framework. I reminded President Trump about the suggestion to re-establish the working group on anti-terrorism. We also mentioned the plethora of regional crises. It's not always that our postures dovetail exactly, and yet the overlapping and mutual interests abound. We have to look for points of contact and interact closer in a variety of international fora. Clearly, we mentioned the regional crisis, for instance, Syria. As far as Syria is concerned, the task of establishing peace and reconciliation in this country could be the first showcase example of the successful joint work. Russia and the United States apparently can act proactively and assume leadership in this issue and organize the interaction to overcome humanitarian crisis and help Syrian refugees to go back to their homes. In order to accomplish this level of successful cooperation in Syria, we have all the required components. Let me remind you that both Russian and American military acquired a useful experience of coordination of their action, established the operational channels of communication, which permitted to avoid dangerous incidents and unintentional collisions in the air and in the ground. Also, crushing terrorists in the southwest of Syria, the south of Syria, should be brought to the full compliance with the Treaty of 1974 about the separation of forces, of Israel and Syria. This will bring peace to Golan Heights and bring a more peaceful relationship between Syria and Israel, and also to provide security of the State of Israel. Mr. President paid special attention to the issue during today's negotiations, and I would like to confirm that Russia is interested in this development and this will act accordingly. Thus far, we will make a step toward creating a lasting peace in compliance with the respective resolutions of Security Council, for instance, the Resolution 338. We're glad that the Korean Peninsula issue is starting to resolve. To a great extent, it was possible thanks to the personal engagement of President Trump, who opted for dialogue instead of confrontation. we also mentioned our concern about the withdrawal of the United States from the JCPOA. Well, the U.S. Our U.S. counterparts are aware of our posture. Let me remind you that thanks to the Iranian nuclear deal, Iran became the most controlled country in the world. It's submitted to the control of IAEA. It effectively ensures the exclusively peaceful nature of Iranian nuclear program and strengthens the non-proliferation regime. While we discussed the internal Ukrainian crisis, we paid special attention to the bona fide implementation of Minsk agreements by Kiev. At the same time, the United States could be more decisive in nudging the Ukrainian leadership and encourage it to work actively in this. We paid more attention to economic ties and economic cooperation. It's clear that both countries, the businesses of both countries, are interested in this. American delegation was one of the largest delegations in the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. It featured over 500 representatives of American businesses. We agreed, me and President Trump, we agreed to create a high-level working group that would bring together captains of Russian and American business. After all, entrepreneurs and businessmen know better how to articulate this successful business cooperation. We'll let them think and make their proposals and suggestions in this regard. Once again, President Trump mentioned the issue of the so-called interference of Russia in the American elections, and I had to reiterate things I said several times, including during our personal context, that the Russian state has never interfered and is not going to interfere into internal American affairs, including the election process. Any specific material, if such things arise, we are ready to analyze together. For instance, we can analyze them through the joint working group on cybersecurity, the establishment of which we discussed during our previous contacts. And clearly, it's past time we restore our cooperation in the cultural area, in the humanitarian area. As far as I think you know that recently we hosted the American Congressman delegation, and now it's perceived and portrayed almost as a historic event, although it should have been just a current affairs, just business as usual. And in this regard, we mentioned this proposal to the President. We have to think about the practicalities of our cooperation, but also about the rationale, the underlying logic of it. And we have to engage experts on bilateral relationship who know history and the background of our relationship. The idea is to create an expert council that would include political scientists, prominent diplomats and former military experts on both countries who would look for points of contact between the two countries, that would look for ways on putting the relationship on the trajectory of growth.